Hamas said, we're going to grab 200 people or so, we're going to hold them hostage. Israel will be tripping over themselves, and when Mahmoud Abbas finally dies, we'll say, we'll give you back all of the hostages as long as you make us the rulers of the West Bank. What they did not expect was for Israel to take a sledgehammer and hit them in the face.
Everybody was so horrified by this. Even inside Israel, it was just like, how did this happen? I want blood for this. I see a lot of cope online, like Iran should just finally destroy Israel.
Iran wants to dominate the Middle East.
If Israel has nukes, we obviously hope we don't have any nuclear escalation. I feel like this conflict is going to get messier before it gets better. What do you think? Ryan, thanks for coming back on the show. It seems like we're doing World War III speed run, but I don't know. I'm here to have you talk me off the ledge, I guess.
I am actually of the opinion that World War III started in 2014. But,
with the invasion of Ukraine from Russia?
With the invasion of Crimea.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct.
So it's sort of like slow lead up. Actually, I don't know how much you know about World War II. I don't know enough to say, is this normal speed or is this ultra slow? Because it's, when you think of a war starting, laymen like me are kind of like, oh, something surprising happens, like Pearl Harbor, and then you just join the fray. And it's like, well, actually, I don't know how World War II started. Was it over a decade and change? Because it might have been.
Well, you could say as the Nazis rose to power, or perhaps when Poland was invaded, which I believe was in 1939. I might have to check my math on that one, but you could say that when we think of World War I or World War II, we go, oh well, World War II it started in 1941. Well, for us. Mm-hmm. But Europe had been fighting it for 2 whole years beforehand, right?
Yeah, that's not a super long time if you're saying that World War III started with the invasion of Crimea in 2014, right? So we're going on a decade now. So we're sort of slowly warming up that flywheel of destruction.
That is certainly possible, yes.
Great. Well, on that cheerful note, I actually we don't have time to go over the whole shebang here. We don't have time to go over the whole World War III prequel. But I think let's focus on Iran and Israel, because when Iran threatened Israel during the initial Gaza sort of stages, the initial stages of the Gaza invasion, I was like, okay, are they going to do anything? Everybody kind of said, proxies will do something. And Hezbollah was like, we're going to destroy Israel. And then they launched some rockets, and then Israel was like, no, we're just going to take out some of your stuff. And they were like, oh, we're not really going to do anything. And Iran was kind of like, I'm over here in the corner, not paying attention to this. I know we talked a big game, but we kind of don't really want to do this. It was just sort of for PR, and we're going to sit this one out. And everyone was like, a lot of the simps online, the sort of war hawk, like everybody destroy Israel, those kinds of folks, they were pretty disappointed that Iran didn't do anything. And then Israel's just blowing up embassies. Let's start from there, because that's kind of where people start wondering what the heck is going on, because I think that went under the radar for a lot of people, and now there's drones and missiles going in both directions.
Absolutely. So to take it back even further, one of the reasons Iran, and I know I say Iran instead of Iran. I'm sorry, I'm from Jersey. It's really difficult for me to say Iran, but to go all the way back, really, Iran wants to dominate the Middle East. They're actually creating something that they kind of call the Shia Crescent. And the whole idea behind this is that Iran can project power, because Iran doesn't really view Israel as its enemy or the U.S. as its enemy. It looks at Saudi Arabia and Sunni Islam as the real enemy. So Iran wants to project power by using proxies, because it can't build aircraft carriers, it can't build huge amphibious landing ships, it can't build an expeditionary army, but it can create a separate religious military. And if you want, we can talk about the Quds Force and the IRGC. And they can use that to kind of fulminate dissent and project power softly and with a lot less expense associated with fighting. So I believe what happened on October 7th was that Hamas got Iran's help with this attack, and the intent was that Mahmoud Abbas, who is, I believe, 88 years old now, Mahmoud Abbas runs the West Bank. And there hasn't been an election in the West Bank since, I believe, 2006. Now, the whole idea is that when you're 88 years old, not a lot left on the actuarial tables, right? So he's going to die one day. And I'm sure Hamas would love to walk into the West Bank and declare themselves the rulers of the West Bank. So they attack Israel, they grab a bunch of hostages, and then hopefully, at least to them, over the next 3 to 5 years, they release one hostage, two hostages. Israel tries to negotiate. Instead, Israel hit them with a sledgehammer to the face. Now, all of the help that Iran was giving Hamas was very useful in this attack. But now, I'm sure Hamas was like, hey, Iran, are you going to actually help us out? I was like, yeah, we really don't care that much about you guys and would really rather remain a country. We don't want to get into a long, protracted war that we can't afford. So I think that's kind of the mentality that Iran is in right now. So there was a meeting in Syria, in Damascus, and a number of IRGC commanders were there. Now, the IRGC is a fascinating organization because if you think about it, imagine, America's a mostly Christian country, right? Imagine if America had an army and then we had right next to it a Christian army. An army just full of religious zealots. And we didn't just have an army. We also had an air force, we had a navy force, we had a special forces, we had a strategic rocket forces, and they were all religious forces. So that's kind of what the IRGC is. Think of it as the religious wing of Iran's army. And Iran's regular army, called the Artesh, they have a mirror image where they actually don't get as good of equipment and as good training as the IRGC does.
So Iranian army, regular army, is like protecting Iran's borders and doing whatever armies maybe do in regular countries. I almost said real countries. Regular countries. And the IRGC, which I think stands for Iran Revolutionary Guard Council or something like that.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Yeah.
They are like they're the favorite child, and they're not protecting the people of Iran. They're protecting the Ayatollahs and the government and the regime of Iran. That's how it was explained to me by an Iranian recently on this very show. I want to say Yas Alizadeh. She was kind of like, there's an army like we have, which supposedly protects the people in the country, and then there's an army that's just for like the government and the elites and the Ayatollahs especially.
That's absolutely correct. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, I think it's also called CPAL. They have a ground force, a navy. They tend to get the better equipment. And in addition to that, they also have the Basiji militia, which is sort of like a religious militia that can be called up. Think of it like a religious National Guard that can be called up for riot control duties. And they have the Quds Force, which you may have heard of before. Quds is like a Persian word for Jerusalem. And think of the Quds as like a combination of the CIA and special forces. And they specialize in assassination, training irregulars. They trained Bosnian Muslims. And Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in a drone strike under the Trump administration, he was a general in the Quds Force. So these 16 Quds officers were meeting at a compound at the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria, and somebody destroyed that embassy.
Right.
Now, the somebody is the question, right? Because Israel never claimed responsibility, but then again, I'm pretty sure it wasn't Botswana.
Yeah, it wasn't a gas leak.
Right. It probably wasn't a gas leak either. Correct.
By the way, earlier, I think I said IRGC is Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps or Council. That was not correct, by the way. It's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So I don't remember what I said earlier, but I meant to say Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, regardless of what I said earlier, just in case people think I have my head in my keister. I don't want. These episodes are supposed to clarify things for people, Ryan, and I'm just muddying the waters when I do stuff like that.
It's not going to get better.
Yeah.
We are dealing with the Middle East and Iran.
I know.
We're dealing with two countries that don't necessarily talk about what happened next.
No, but the least I can do is get the freaking acronyms right. So Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC.
Correct.
So that's the Islamic Army of Iran. And the Quds Force is the CIA Special Forces wing. It's it seems like they don't really need all these, but what do I know? We have multiple branches of our military too. It just seems like they have a lot of parallel branches for whatever reason.
You're absolutely correct. And that is necessary to them because these parallel branches can get better funding, and they are filled with the kind of people who want to go on these missions. Whereas Artesh, it's an army. Every male has to serve time in Artesh, or they're drafted. I've spoken with guys who said, look, I did Artesh for, was in the Iranian army for 2 years. I fired 7 rounds out of a rifle. Other than that, we did absolutely nothing. So it's almost like by having this separate religious military, they can direct funding toward that. And the Artesh kind of becomes a way to keep young men busy for 2 years. So they're not rioting in the streets about the conditions that they're actually under. And then after those 2 years, then they can go to college and start their lives.
This is Ryan. This is more geopolitical, so feel free to pass on this one. But I feel like I often see things like this in authoritarian regimes, right? There's like this army, and then there's this parallel army, and then there's this other sort of mini parallel guard force. And you see that in authoritarian nations. And I wonder if it has to do with, well, if there's an army here and they wanted to take over the country, we've got another army here that's sort of more loyal to these folks, and another one over here. So they're busy fighting for funding and power. If one tries to take over, we've got another one we can sort of bounce off of them. Whereas the United States, we don't have to worry about the Air Force taking over the White House and the Senate. It's not a thing we sit here.
You're absolutely correct.
At night over.
I think there was a book called How to Be a Dictator, which kind of talked about this, how essentially dictators, they need to please like 3 groups of people: the political class, the military, and the police forces. And if you have 2 organizations that are constantly competing with each other, maybe they won't join together and go after you. A good example is Sudan. Sudan had a military, and they also had a military called the RSF, which is sort of like a militia that would do the dirty work. If you heard of Darfur and the John Weed militia, the John Weed militia became the RSF, or I believe Rapid Security Forces. And the current civil war in Sudan is all about the army saying, hey, RSF, you need to actually kind of come into the fold. And the RSF said, nah, we kind of want to be independent.
Yeah, we covered that in episode 905. That was also an out-of-the-loop episode on Sudan. The reason I think I had that little bit of knowledge about the dictators is we did the Dictator's Handbook is something I read for the show, episode 794. And I think Alistair Smith, who came on the show, I think he was the one who talked about dictators want competing factions, even if it results in massive inefficiencies, because part of that is it's less efficient to then go, hey, we're all generals here. Why do we give that guy all of our money? What does that guy do again? Let's just kill that guy and then we can split the and it's like, oh, because that guy also has another army with another bunch of generals that aren't sitting in this room, and they want to kill us too. So maybe we just let and the dictator's kind of there with his arm's length army over here, arm's length army over there, and he's like, let me juggle you 2 guys and keep you from killing each other. So he makes it so you need them. Right, they almost need the dictator in order to avoid imploding. It's diabolical, but it's quite clever. The problem is it's fragile, right? And that's kind of what we're hoping is the case with Iran. But again, this is more geopolitical. This is more geopolitical than I wanted to get. I want to talk about the embassy mysteriously explodes, or was it a consulate that mysteriously exploded? Do we know?
Well, I believe consulate is the actual appropriate term. I think embassy is the mission. You have the ambassador, that is the embassy, but the consulate is the physical building. And technically it wasn't really the consulate. It was a building that was inside the consulate compound. But again, most countries don't normally attack someone else's consulate. And you could say that blowing up an embassy or a consulate is a declaration of war. Just recently, Ecuador actually went into Mexico's embassy, which is not something nations normally do.
No, that was big news. Although it was eclipsed by the massive gas leak in the embassy that killed. So it killed a bunch of Iranian military officers of various branches. Can you discuss who these people were? Because it was a really well-timed gas leak that was just a total freak accident that nobody claimed responsibility for, and it killed some pretty important folks, eh?
You're absolutely correct. I know that one person was the head of the Quds Force. I believe it was General Mohammed Zahedi, and a deputy of General Zahedi. So those are the two main people that Israel is probably going after, and most likely those people had something to do with assisting Hamas in October 7th.
Okay, so that's kind of on brand for Israel, right? Because when we had the Munich attacks, which were essentially... who did that? I don't even remember who did that. I know it was Palestinian.
I believe it was the PLO.
The PLO? Yeah, I think you're right. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was back then strictly terrorism. They went and killed a bunch of the Israeli Olympic team in 1972, was it, in Munich?
I believe so, yes.
And Israel basically, if there's a movie called Munich, which is actually really good, and Israel just spent the next, I think, 20 plus years hunting those guys down in the safe houses where they were and killed all of them.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah. They don't tend to forget.
No. And so they went after this. They're going to go after everybody who had anything to do with October 7th that's not already pink mist, essentially, at this point. And so Israel gets rid of these officers, takes a couple of staffers with them, and that's when everybody's like, uh-oh, that's a declaration of war. Iran can defend itself. And what happens after that? Because it gets a little bit confusing about why these counterattacks happen that were not super effective.
So what happened next is Iran basically said, we are going to strike back. And then nothing happened for 2 weeks until Iran basically announced that they were going to attack Israel. Mm-hmm. And they fired 350 weapons. I believe it was 195 drones, 110 ballistic missiles, 25 cruise missiles. It was a very strange attack, mainly because Iran fired off the drones, which could take about 10 hours to reach Israel. We're talking about Shahed 131s, 136s, which are powered by a lawnmower engine, essentially, right? They fired these drones off, and they said, hey, we just did this. They let everybody know, and they said, we consider this matter settled. Now,
before the drones even hit. So not only was it not a surprise attack, it was like, well, this is our mic drop. Whatever happens. But then what happens is Jordan, the U.S., I had nothing to do with it, the country of Jordan, just to be clear, the United States and Israel shot down like 99.5% of these things. I mean, it was
You're
like
absolutely correct.
One or two hit.
And we also have to include Saudi Arabia in that. We have to include France in that. A lot of our allies, they took it upon themselves to help out with this mission, because number one, it's good practice. You get good telemetry data and information as to what's going on, and it's within no one's interest to allow Israel to be hit with ballistic missiles and cause casualties. Everyone seems to be afraid of a wider war. And also, in addition to that, the USS Eisenhower participated. Their aircraft launched from their ship to participate in this attack, or at least the command control of it. And they also had the USS Carney. The USS Carney, this plucky little destroyer, has been doing circles in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, shooting down Houthi missiles, and they had one final mission. They certainly went out with a bang.
I mean, they're just, those guns are gonna need a refurb on that boat, because they are just they've gotten a lifetime worth of use in the past few months on that thing.
The Carney should definitely win Defensive Player of the Year. They've mainly been firing missiles. I believe this was the first SM-3 kill of a ballistic missile ever. And the SM-3 it's called a standard missile. It's fired from the USS Carney. But those magazines must be getting pretty dry right now. I believe it was headed back to Florida, to their home port in Florida. When this happened, there was just one last. They had to give it their all one last time.
Yeah, wow, one last rep in the out of it. You know, it's kind of a bummer that they named it the Standard Missile 3. You see all these other missiles with really cool names like Storm Shadow, and it's like, oh, what are we going to call these? Standard Missile 3.
During the Gulf War, I mean, you couldn't have gotten any better. You had the Scud versus the Patriot. You couldn't get a
Yeah.
more perfect name, right?
And now we just have this like, hey guys, we are out of ideas. Let's just call it the Standard Missile 3 for
Standard
now.
Missile.
We'll think of something cool later on. Oh, you shipped them already. Well, that's what they're called then in that case. That's what's printed on the box. So, okay, they shot down all the drones, and Iran's like, fine, this is over. It seems like they also are on board with not wanting a wider conflict. It was really kind of entertaining reading the messages online. Iran's going to destroy Israel, and then nothing. Oh, this is such a bummer. Why aren't they doing anything? Oh, look at all this stuff they launched. Israel's done for. Oh, only one missile hit a airfield with nothing on it? Oh, okay. Well, they must have did that on purpose. And then, of course, it cost Israel and the United States a bunch of money, which is like a 0.001% of 1 month of the defense budget or something like that whenever stuff like this happens because the numbers are so astronomical. And then, fortunately, unfortunately, Israel's like, we're not done here. And I was just kind of like, it was quite, my opinion as a layman was, it's kind of fortunate that you were able to destroy these officers. And all it cost us was a bunch of money and target practice to down all these drones. Maybe we call it a win. And Israel was kind of like, not so fast. We're going to take this one step further. And I originally wasn't even going to record this because I thought, this is over with. And then the day I talked with you, it was like, missiles headed from Israel to Iran. And it's like, hey, can you do this tomorrow? Can we record this tomorrow?
I always loved coming on your show. You have the best fans. You have the smartest fans. That's for darn sure.
That's for sure.
I can tell you that I think one of the reasons Israel had to do some sort of counterstrike was that one of the missiles fired from Iran landed near, and I might be pronouncing this wrong, Nevatim Air Base, which is where Israel has their F-35s, which is a stealthy fighter plane. Now, what's interesting is that Nevatim is about 11 miles or 17 kilometers for your European listeners. 11 miles away is Hatzrazim Air Base, which is 11 miles, 17 kilometers to the east. That's where Israel keeps their nuclear weapons, if they have any. So this might have been a way for Iran to say, hey, we know where you're keeping your nuclear weapons that you don't admit you have. We can drop a weapon right on top of your airfield where you will load those missiles on. So they'll take them from Hatzrazim to Nevatim, load them on F-35s, and move toward targets from there. So that might have been Iran's way of saying, hey, we know your secret and we can drop a missile here anytime we want. Now, Israel's response, assuming it was Israel, was actually kind of brilliant. So what may or may not have happened, and this is why I said I'm glad people want to get in the loop on this, but I'm not even sure anybody really knows what happened a couple of nights ago. But here's what may have happened. Israel may have brought F-35s over Syria. They hit some radar sites in Syria on the way, and then they end up in Iran, and they fired a ballistic missile called a Blue Sparrow. Now, these are ballistic missiles that kind of hang off the wings of these planes. It could have been an F-35, could have been an F-15, not really sure. And Israel, of course, isn't saying. But the Blue Sparrow isn't a weapon that has a warhead. The Blue Sparrow is kind of like a decoy or a dummy missile. And these missiles are used to train operators and test missile defense systems. So Israel has a couple of missile defense systems. Everyone's heard of the Iron Dome, but that's a really short-range system. There's another system called David Sling, which is a medium-range system. And there's another system called Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. So these weapons, these Blue Sparrows, would be used or might be used to test the Arrow 2s and Arrow 3s. So they send a couple of F-15s or perhaps F-35s over, and they go vertical, and they launch these Blue Sparrow missiles. And these Blue Sparrow missiles fly in an arc, and they head toward this air base, the Hesse Aircraft Manufacturing Base, which, believe it or not, had actually been built by Textron. That's where they used to build the Bell 214 helicopters that Iran had in the 70s.
Back when they were an ally of the United States.
Absolutely, when they were an ally. So we fire these unarmed missiles, and we do it in the middle of the night. So there's probably not going to be anyone at the airbase, and we program these things to kind of land in the desert, just bang right up into the dirt. And it's a way of saying, hey, we can also strike back at you, but we're not going to put any warheads on these things. Now, another thing that may or may not have happened was a drone attack, maybe. Iran said that they had shot down 3 drones or several drones. So that might be a lie. In fact, Iran said that Israel had launched toys, but it's certainly possible that special forces or Mossad or Iranians who are against the government could have launched these toy drones to do something, or even just to be launched and then shot down, just as a way of saying, hey, we have operatives in your country and we can strike you anytime we want.
Yeah, Iran actually said infiltrators had done whatever had gotten done in Isfahan, or Isfahan, I think is the name of the city.
Correct.
And it's just been interesting to see, right? Like, you can see it sort of being de-escalated. I originally was like, oh no, Israel, don't do anything that's going to get everybody pissed off again. We don't want to escalate this conflict. But it really is kind of like you put, you know that game Battleship? It's like you strike right next to the ship. It's like they can see the ship and they're striking right next to it. And they're like, look, we didn't hit it, but we didn't hit it on purpose. Iran, same thing. Hey guys, we're launching a bunch of pretty slow drones that are going to take about 10 hours to get there, and then we're done. We're taking our ball and we're going home, and because we've done our thing. And then it's like they all got shot down, and Iran is like we said, we're done here. And Israel's like, well, not so fast. We just want to show you that we also know where you keep your expensive stuff. We're not going to blow it up, but we're just going to put that right there so that you know that if you guys fart around too much, what we put there next time is going to be a massive explosion. It's going to take out whatever, your uranium refinement or whatever it is that they're doing over there in Isfahan. So this is hopefully kind of the end of it, but I don't know. What do you think? Because it seems like now everybody's said their piece, but who knows? Because now Israel's going to go into Rafa, from what we understand, correct?
That is most likely the next step, and we don't know when that's going to happen. It probably won't happen this week because this week is the Jewish holiday of Passover. So it probably won't happen this week. But the longer they wait, the more chances the world has to get angry at Israel, demand a ceasefire. And in the case of a ceasefire, Hamas wins. So what we're probably going to see, if you want to talk about Rafa, is we're going to see something that was very similar to the Battle of Fallujah, or perhaps Mosul, where Israel will surround the entire city. And they're going to drop leaflets and send out text messages and put broadcasts out on the radio. It says, if you are a non-combatant, get out. And they'll probably put them to the left of Khan Yunis in Gaza. There is this big farmer's field area. It's kind of between, can't remember the darn name of the town, but it is to the west of the city of Khan Yunis. There's some farmers' fields, and they're probably going to tell people, okay, go over there. You're going to be safe there. Men, or women and children can leave, and any man leaving is going to be biometrically scanned to see if you're in a database. They'll probably use a swipe on their hands as well to check their hands for explosives or residue.
Huh. Wow.
Oh yeah. That's what I would do.
But how do they do it? How do they go into Rafah and let people through a protected?
What they would do is create a
barrier?
cordon. Now, ideally, Israel should go to this farmer's field, and I can't remember the darn name of it. It was Al-Masawi. Al-Masawi. So between Khan Yunis and Al-Masawi is this large, multiple kilometers of farmers' fields. So what Israel should do, and hopefully they will do this, is set up camps there where people can get food and shelter and medical attention, or at least let NGOs, non-government organizations, set up camps there. So that way people can get treatment and live and eat while Israel conducts this operation. They have to go out through a cordon, meaning there's certain areas that people can go out through. If you're a male, they have biometric scanners. They're going to check your eyes, and they'll also take a cloth and they'll, I don't know if you've ever dealt with this at the airport with the TSA, they put a little piece of cloth on a wand and they wipe down your suitcase.
I get that all the time, actually. And I don't know if it's just me or if everybody gets it. I get it all the time.
So sometimes they do that, right? It might be random or it might be targeted, right? So they'll put it on a cloth and they'll stick it in a machine. The machine will analyze that cloth for explosives. So if you're a male and you have explosive residue on your hands or gunpowder on your hands, you're getting pulled aside for further questioning. Everybody else, women and children, go through. And that'll pretty much ensure that everybody else left in the city of Rafa is a combatant. Now, 10% won't leave. 10% of the people are not going to leave. That is just, no matter what happens, even when the National Guard goes to people during a hurricane and says, hey, you really need to leave, about 10% of people don't. The actual great way of countering that, by the way, is to hand them a Sharpie marker and say, write your social security number on your body parts. That way we can identify you later. But that's kind of an aside there.
Yeah, wait, interesting. I always wondered what those people are thinking when it's like your house is in the middle of the hurricane zone. Everybody's got to evacuate. Why are you still here? I ain't leaving. Okay, but you're probably going to die.
Some people are afraid of looting, and some people, if nothing bad has ever happened to you, then it might be very difficult for you to understand that something very bad can happen to you under the right set of circumstances.
That is true, but it's like Jedediah. Nobody wants your black and white TV. Nobody. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants your bug bed mattress, man. I understand you don't want to leave, but yeah. More likely it's what you said. People who have not had horrible things happen to them don't understand that horrible things can happen to them. That's when I got kidnapped the first time in Mexico, and I remember thinking, this isn't a kidnapping. I've never been kidnapped before. And then I had to be like, that's a really dumb counter argument to not being a really bad thing right now. The counter that this hasn't happened before doesn't really make sense. It's kind of like saying, I've never gotten shot before, so I can't get shot now. It's like, no, you can absolutely get shot right now if you are staring down the barrel of a gun. So yeah, you're right. It's an aside, but you got to wonder who's in a war zone going, I'm not leaving. It's like, this is a level of delusion that I don't know whether to just be in awe of or what. It's just shocking.
You're also dealing with people who, the Nakba, the catastrophe, when many of the Palestinians were kicked out of their homes. I believe only 1/3 of the people in Gaza lived there originally. Everybody else fled there because either the Arabs kicked them out or the Jews kicked them out. Mm-hmm. So being removed from your home is a genuine fear for a lot of Palestinians.
Yeah,
in fact, if you go to some homes, they have a key hanging in a picture frame, and this was the key to the house that we had. And one day we're going to go back to that house, inshallah. Right?
Yeah.
So the idea of leaving your house is very difficult. And there also might be people who don't want to leave because they're elderly. Look, I've lived my life. If I die here, inshallah, I die. There might also be terrorists who do not want people to leave because it is within their best interest to cause a humanitarian crisis and to cause civilian casualties. That is a horrible thing to think, that there will be people who don't want people to leave. We need you to stay here and die. You will die a shaheed. You'll go right to heaven. So it's okay. Don't worry about it. But that's not something that a lot of Westerners can really understand. Both being kicked out of your homes and the concept of, well, you know what? If you die, it's God's will and you'll go right to heaven.
It's like, but it's not God's will. I'm trying to leave right now and you're keeping me here. It's your will. It's not God's will.
That is the issue with Hamas.
Yeah, that is the issue with Hamas. Yes. Yeah. Also, hey, man, guys, I'm Christian, because there's tons of, Arab Christians, Palestinian Christians. Like, hey, I'm Christian. I don't need to die. What do you mean, shaheed? No, no, thank you. I'm here for a few more Christmases if I can get the hell out of here. Thanks for watching on YouTube. Remember, you can also enjoy The Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our podcast feed is a treasure trove of insights from intellectuals, authors, spies, artists, athletes, pioneers, engineers, former mafia bosses, and business leaders, all sharing their secrets to success. For more information, click the link in the description. Now, back to the show. I do feel, of course, horrible for this whole situation. Is absolutely terrible. Do we know what Israel's plan is in Rafah? I mean, after they try to evacuate it, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to do that. But are they just going to go house to house fighting Hamas? Is that the idea?
Yes and no. They will go house to house, but they probably won't be as surgical as they could be. Because remember, this is the last stretch. And I've said this before, that a dead Palestinian can't vote for the prime minister of Israel, but the mother of a dead Israeli soldier can. So if you have a choice between, hey, there's a house, there's a machine gun in that house. There might be people in it too. Now, which IDF soldier wants to be the last one to die in this operation, right? So now, if you have a choice, like, hey, we got Artie, we got artillery support, hey, we can call in a JDAM strike. How likely are you to call in that JDAM strike?
Yeah.
You might be pretty darn likely.
For you.
Might be pretty darn likely.
This is such a mess, this conflict.
It is.
It's really gross. Like, I understand both sides in so many ways. And I understand Israel has to respond to October 7th, but man, it's so difficult to wrap my mind around the number of civilians that are dying as a result of this. Anyway, that's a whole tangent we don't need to get into, but this is going to be so horrible, Rafa.
It's tough. It's tough because, when the whole thing started, I had said that the reason that Hamas went and grabbed these hostages was, hey, we're going to parcel these guys out for the next 5 years. There was a gentleman, Gilad Shalit, I might be pronouncing his name wrong. He was an Israeli soldier who was captured, I want to say back in 2006 or so, and he was held prisoner until 2011. He was an Israeli soldier that was at a checkpoint. Hamas came through a tunnel. They killed a couple of his friends. They grabbed him, dragged him back to the tunnel, and he was held hostage for 5 years. And it was a huge embarrassment to the Israeli government.
Yeah,
I think these guys said, Gilad Shalit. And I think that Hamas said, we're going to grab 200 people or so. We're going to hold them hostage for the next 5 years. Israel will be tripping over themselves. And when Mahmoud Abbas finally dies, we'll say, we'll give you back all of the hostages. And as long as you make us, as long as you appoint us the rulers of the West Bank, we'll give them all back. However, what they did not expect was for Israel to take a sledgehammer and hit them in the face. And so I've said that one of the miscalculations, at least on Hamas's side, is that Hamas thought Israel would be doing counterinsurgency. And they were prepared for a counterinsurgency operation. We will fight them one by one. They come in with the helicopters. We'll shoot at them. We'll move. We'll fight this insurgency against them. And instead, Israel did LSCO, or large-scale combat operations, where they just went in with a steamroller and just destroyed everything. And Hamas went, oh, okay, was not expecting that. I mean, just a couple of days ago, there was talk of a ceasefire, and Israel said, "Oh, give us 40 prisoners," and unfortunately, Hamas can't find 40 living prisoners.
Right. Whether that's because Israel has killed them inadvertently, or more like, I mean, there's probably some of that, but it also seems like this whole October 7th raid was not just Hamas surgically going and grabbing people and bringing them back, right? I mean, you have reports from hostages that they were kept with seemingly quite random Palestinian families in their house.
That is one thing, and it's also possible that I know one gentleman who works in an NGO. He works in a non-governmental organization, Paul Wagner. He fought in Ukraine, and when this war occurred after October 7th, he left Ukraine and hooked up with an NGO, and now he is working every day tirelessly to feed Palestinians as part of an organization that helps support World Central Kitchen, which we could talk about that one if you'd like as well.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, let's do that.
And these guys, this guy works every single day, to feed these people. And one of the things that that he's said is how these people were not prepared for this absolute onslaught, that they were facing, and there just wasn't the strategic reserves to feed people when if an incident like this happened. It's this guy Paul Wagner, fascinating guy.
You mentioned World Central Kitchen. Can we talk about that? That was this like
Absolutely.
massively horrible. I mean, I'll say mistake, accident. Some people don't think it was. Tell us what happened.
So the World Central Kitchen is an organization. It's owned by Jose Andres. He actually owns a number of restaurants in Washington D.C. I've eaten at them. He's an incredible guy. He's
You're
a real
basically an expert
humanitarian.
on
He is-
Jose Andres having
I've
eaten,
eaten his food.
some of his food.
He is a humanitarian and a real humanitarian. He doesn't care who is hungry, he will feed them. And he has operated in Ukraine. He has operated in many conflict zones, even inside the U.S. After a hurricane. He will set up shop and he will feed people. And World Central Kitchen was operating in a convoy of 3 trucks, and they were moving to a warehouse where they unloaded a certain amount of food. And they had already sent up what's called the deconfliction notice. So World Central Kitchen, any NGO, any non-governmental organization coordinates with the IDF, and they tell them, here's where we're going. Here's how long we're going to be there. Here's the route we're taking. Here's what our trucks look like. Here's how many personnel we have. Here's how long we're going to be in each location. There's actually a website that Israel has, and you upload that information. Now, whether they get that information is a different story. And I think that's what might have happened. So these trucks, they went to a warehouse. Maybe or maybe not, there was Hamas or some sort of militia there, some sort of armed gang. And those armed gang members may have entered the same warehouse. So when those trucks left, the drone operators are looking, and all they know is that there were armed gang members who entered this one house, and then these trucks leave. And I don't think anybody looked at the actual paperwork that said, hey, World Central Kitchen is operating in this area. Now, another problem that happened. On these World Central Kitchen trucks, on the sides and on the top of the truck were the World Central Kitchen logos as stickers.
Right.
Stickers are great during the daytime. When you're traveling at night and you're using night vision, it's hard to see a sticker. Stickers don't tend to show up all that well in infrared. So it just might be a blob. So the Israelis saw those trucks leave. They tailed those trucks. They went up their chain of command. Hey, we saw a bunch of guys go into a warehouse. Trucks left that warehouse. Do we have permission to engage? Yes. And they engaged those 3 trucks with drone drop munitions, most likely Hellfire missiles. And they killed 7 World Central Kitchen employees. Now, what they probably should have done was coordinate with the Israelis and use what are called infrared strobes. Think of them as little strobe lights that only operate in the infrared frequency.
Yeah.
And every day they might put a different pattern of strobes on top of their vehicles. And that way the IDF knows, okay, that's this particular unit or that's this particular NGO. They have this particular strobe code. We know that they're okay. But a number of Israelis were fired over that because they just didn't follow procedure and actually take a look at their documents and go, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't fire at this convoy. It could be World Central Kitchen.
Oh, this is such a tragedy. And I'm active in the Palestine subreddit, which is a Reddit forum, but also the Israel subreddit, which is, of course, very active these days, both of them. And it was really interesting because, of course, the Palestine subreddit is full of people who are very pro-Palestine. The Israel subreddit is full of people who are very pro-Israel. After this convoy was hit, you couldn't tell which message was from which subreddit. Everybody was so horrified by this. Even inside Israel, it was just like, how did this happen? I want blood for this. And I was like, oh, they're really angry over there in the Palestine. Nope, this is the Israeli subreddit. I mean, they were just really, really really upset about this. And understandably, I mean, it's a terrible look, but also, for God's sake, I mean, how does a mistake like this happen? It's just absolutely tragic, doesn't do it justice.
It doesn't. And there were a number. So I always pronounce this incorrectly, but there is a term in Hebrew, "Ya beseder." Don't worry about it. Right?
Kol beseder.
"Ya beseder." So I could easily see someone from the IDF going like, okay, yeah, we have it. We have your boat. Don't worry about it. We have the route. Everything's fine. And just one person doesn't talk to the other. Deconfliction is hard. Russia found out how hard deconfliction was over the skies of Ukraine, where they're shooting down their own planes because they don't know which plane is where. We still screw it up. people in the JSOC in the Joint Command Center in Qatar, who were controlling missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is very difficult when you have all these air assets flying and stuff on the ground. Imagine spinning plates, but some plates are up in the air, some plates are on the ground. You have to know where all this stuff is. However, why does Ryan McBeth have to come up with the idea of, hey, why don't we put IR strobes on top of our vehicles?
So it's funny you thought of that, because I thought, how did they not see IR strobes on the vehicles? That was the first thing I thought of. I feel like they must have had that and still something went wrong, right?
No,
I've never stickers. The closest I've come to the military is training guys in the Rangers and stuff like that, basically giving a keynote speech and running some drills. Like, that's the closest I've come to the military. I was in the Marine Reserves in college, but like, that's, that doesn't really, that's just you getting yelled at a bunch. And so this is not so novel that somebody like me should have thought of it. So I refuse to believe that wasn't already, it just must have so many drawbacks that they didn't do it, right? I'd like
Either
to
that
think,
or they didn't care. Like it always worked before, right? Look, we haven't had a problem yet, so it's not a problem until it is. Right? And if you're kind of under that mindset, or under the mindset of, you know what, if we strike, look, this is one of the bad things about Israel losing the information war. It might be a situation where they go like, look, you know what, if we accidentally strike an aid workers' vehicles, is the world going to hate us more? And that's kind of a horrible calculus, right? Like,
right,
look, we could spend all this extra time making sure these aid vehicles are okay so they don't get hit, or we can not do that. It probably won't happen. And if it does, what's the worst that can happen? The world hates us more? The world already hates us. Are they going to hate us harder?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We're in last place already. I mean, what they can't afford is to be hated so much the United States says we are no longer going to back you. But I'm wondering what you think is the likelihood of this, because, you hear these murmurs like, Biden, we need to sanction Israel. It worked for South Africa, right? We arms embargo and then boycott everything and yada, yada. And it's like, okay, probably not going to happen. On the other hand, if you blow up enough aid workers trying to deliver food to Gaza, the pressure starts to mount pretty quick.
That's a tough one. And it's not just a lot of people who don't understand how the military works just think that Israel has a blank check, and whenever they want more Hellfires, they just write out the check, they hand it to America, and America ships over a bunch of Hellfires. Doesn't really work like that. Now, one thing that we do have with Israel is a symbiotic relationship. In the sense that we actually bought some of their trophy systems. And a trophy is almost like an iron dome for a tank. These trophy systems shoot down incoming anti-tank missiles. We bought, I think, about 100 of these trophy systems, and we installed them on M1 tanks, and those tanks are in Germany right now. We're getting telemetry data for how their missile systems work shooting down incoming missiles. So we help them develop technology, they help us develop technology. So actually creating some sort of embargo or sanctions wouldn't necessarily be within our best interest defense-wise. And also, if you can withhold weapons, you have a lot more control over somebody than if you don't. If you just sanction somebody and say, we're not going to give you weapons anymore, then you've just totally lost control over those people.
That's true.
But as long as you are holding that carrot, dangling that carrot off the stick, you can say, listen, real armies make sure they have a humanitarian plan. So before you go into Rafa, you need to set up camps in that area between Khan Yunis and Al-Masawi and make sure those camps are staffed with people that have food, you have good hygiene, latrines, and a place for people to sleep. And we're not going to release this, that, or the other until you do that thing. So as long as you have some sort of thing to offer, then your partner might actually listen.
Mm-hmm. I know the EU and the United States sanctioned Iran more as well after this latest sort of back and forth. I am no Iran simp. People on this show will know that I am not a fan of the Islamic regime. In fact, I should be really clear. Iran's like the top of my list in places I want to visit. However, I am not going there until the last Ayatollah, has taken his last breath and is lowered into the ground, right? I might get there just in time to throw a couple handfuls of dirt on that casket or whatever. But I still, it sort of baffles me why we needed to pile on, right? Isn't the Israel-Iran thing kind of done? Why do the EU and the USA have to be like, yeah, and throw a little bit of spite after it? It doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
I am actually not quite sure what else we can sanction.
Yeah,
And
that's the other thing. What are we tightening the screws on? This is already
yeah, I think the only stuff
pretty
we really
maxed out.
allow in is humanitarian aid anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if are you familiar with the Apple computer stores in Iran?
No, are they real? They're fake,
No,
right?
no, they're fake. So a couple of months ago, I made a lot of Iranian. I had no idea I had so many Iranian fans. And then when Masha Amini was murdered by the religious police or the morality police in Iran, I had all of these Iranians write me because they were protesting in the streets. They said, "Ryan, help us fight back. Teach us
They
how
were
to make
everywhere.
a bomb."
I got a ton of those too. We need your voice, right?
Make a
that was a
bomb.
large effort.
I don't know how to make a bomb, and if I know how to make a bomb, you don't know how to make a bomb. If you don't know how to make a bomb, you shouldn't be making a bomb because there's no such thing as a bomb maker who got a B. Right? You're graded pass fail. Right?
That's true. Yes, it is
So,
a pass-fail class.
don't be making a bomb in your mom's kitchen, right? So these Iranians would contact me, and the best I could do is actually I released the Iranian police radio spectrum. So, all right, you want to make a jammer? I can help you do that, right? So I didn't really realize how many Iranian fans I had. And one of these kids, he wants to study computer science, and he said to me, "Ryan, should I buy a Mac or a PC?" And I said, "Mac? You can buy a Mac?" He's like, "Yeah." So in Iran, they have these Apple stores. They look like Apple stores. They dressed them up to look like Apple stores. They have the white or the natural wood tables, and they have everything laying out on the tables. People will travel to Qatar and Turkey, and they'll buy iPhones, and they'll buy iPads, and they'll buy Macs, and they bring them back to Iran, and they set them up in their Apple store, just like they're a real Apple store, but they're not. That's how badly Iranians want to be Western.
Well, I mean, I see that all the time. We have a ton. My show actually has quite a large footprint of Iranian fans, and it's like not a double-digit percentage, but a large single-digit percentage of the audience just happens to be listening from Iran, which is highly unusual. And that's whenever I say this on the show, I always get messages like, "It's more than that because we all use VPNs. It's more than that. We all use VPNs to say we're in Canada or the United States or the UK." So it could even be a double-digit percentage of the audience, which is shocking actually, because one, this show is in English. I mean, Iranians must speak really good English, especially if they're in large cities. Two, this is one of those countries where it's really easy to conflate the people with the government, and it's really not. When you go to North Korea, everyone's pretty on board with Kim Jong-un. But when you talk to Iranians who are even the ones that are in Iran, they're like, hell no. These Ayatollahs are insane. Screw these guys. The government's insane. And they'll say things like, "We're normal. Look at us. This is a party at my house." And what you see is a bunch of teenagers drinking beer and wine, hanging out, playing music. You couldn't tell, aside from the occasional hijab, that this was not a college party in Indiana. You really couldn't.
Now, one of the best movies I've ever seen, it was called The Iran Job. And it was about an American basketball player who was never quite good enough to make the NBA, but he got a chance to play in Iran. And at one point in the movie, this is a documentary, this film crew followed him. At one point in the movie, he wanted to get a Christmas tree. And these Iranians, they didn't really understand the concept of a Christmas tree, but my God, shopkeeper went to shopkeeper to help this guy try to find a Christmas tree. And it was heartwarming seeing that. These are, I think they are some of the warmest darn people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's, again, top of my list of countries I would love to visit. A little bit scared to do it right now. Given shows like this that I make, I don't know how much they would take. Like, you're a journalist. No, I'm a podcaster. It's kind of like a journalist, only I have no qualifications, and some of it is talking out of my ass. Oh, okay. Well, you're still going to prison with the other journalists, so maybe you can learn some more of your craft inside. Yeah. I know we're running up on time here. I see a lot of cope online, like Iran should just finally destroy Israel. What do you think of that? I mean, Israel is, we're doing wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe a nuclear power. Yeah. But you mentioned earlier, more importantly, Iran just doesn't have an expeditionary army, right? Which means they can't fight outside of Iran, correct?
So both Iran and Israel have short arms and short legs. They can't bring stuff to the fight, and once they get to the fight, they can't sustain. So you've heard that term, what if they had a war but nobody came, right? It was popular during the 70s, right, during Vietnam. What if they had a war but nobody came? Well, what if they had a war and nobody could actually get there? Like, we want to have, could you imagine Mexico trying to invade, like, Ecuador? Like, all right, well, how, right? So if Iran actually wanted to fight a war with Israel, all right, well, they would have to go through Syria, they'd have to go through Iraq, they'd have to go through Syria. So it might be a little, those two countries might have something to say about mass divisions of troops traveling through their country, right? And then once they get to Israel, they're going to have to actually sustain and feed those troops. And that's a really tough thing to do when you're giving your Artesh 7 rounds of ammunition a year, right? So if you want to talk about a seaborne invasion, Iran has maybe 7 amphibious troop ships, ships that can actually perform an amphibious landing. And by the time they got out of the Persian Gulf, they would be sunk. All right? That's not. And Israel, they don't have any expeditionary capability to go much further than Lebanon, southern Lebanon, if that. A lot of it just comes down, and I don't believe they have a single, their Navy doesn't have a single amphibious assault ship. Why? Right? Who are they invading? Right? Israel is a mostly defensive army with some minor expeditionary capability near their borders. So, those two, you can say you're having a war all you want, but a war might actually be tossing missiles and cyber attacks at each other. It won't actually involve physical troops fighting on the ground, because how do you get there? And once you get there, how do you sustain?
It seems like Iran is also really tough to, even the United States, I would say, would have a really tough time with Iran, because it's mountains galore. The terrain is crazy. Yeah. Iran, if they are going to overthrow the despotic Ayatollah crazy kooky regime, it's really got to come from inside, and it's got to be like a lot of people got to be on board with that in order for that to fall.
It is. We could probably sink the Iranian Navy in an afternoon.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be so much of an issue.
What was that operation where we kind of already did that?
That was, oh my goodness. It was during the 1980s. It was, oh my goodness. I cannot remember. Reagan.
It's called. It's so often that I hear this. Operation Praying Mantis.
Praying Mantis.
When
yes,
was
where
that?
he destroyed some of their oil platforms that they were using.
1988.
Yeah.
April 18th, 1988. So we just passed the anniversary of that. The operation's goals were to neutralize surveillance posts on gas and oil separation platforms, sink something called the Sabalan, which I assume is it's a frigate, Iranian frigate, and avoid civilian casualties and minimize environmental effects, which I'm surprised to see there in the 80s. Like, we should probably care about not dumping a bunch of oil in the water. They actually did. So that was like, they sunk a huge percentage of the Iranian Navy in one day.
Yeah,
and that was in the 80s.
They recovered. So one of the things that Iran has is they have entire squadrons of fast attack boats. Think of a cigarette boat, like a cartel cigarette boat. And they'll just strap 2 anti-ship missiles on this cigarette boat. And so, again, Iran is really good at doing things on the cheap. Now, they might not be able to afford a large frigate. I think they have a couple large frigates, but I don't believe any of them are new. But they can pump out these small, fast attack boats that are very difficult to hit. And if you do shoot some ordnance at them, you're firing a $5 million missile at a cigarette boat that costs $250,000. Maybe the missiles, both the ordnance on those boats probably cost more than the actual boat. right? So you have a lot of targets out there. You can have these swarms where you have multiple ships coming at you. So it might actually be, I might have to take that back. It might actually be harder to sink the entire Iranian Navy in one day if we're talking about the cigarette boats as well.
Yeah.
But Iran is
Either
so
way,
good at doing stuff on the cheap.
Not a conflict that Israel can handle, and not a conflict that Iran could also handle. So we're not worried about these two. Although if Israel has nukes, which again, like, you know, we kind of know that they do, that would go a long way. We obviously hope we don't have any nuclear escalation, because that's when. That's the whole thing about "quote unquote" destroying Israel. Is like that's not going to happen, right? If it gets close to, hey, we're being invaded by 7 armies on each side, they're just going to drop bombs on the capitals of those countries doing that. Correct?
Yes, I can see that. I also that one of the other issues with a lot of those armies is that if they say Israel is surrounded by adversaries, and that's sort of, for the most part, for the most part, the Jordanians, at least the rulers, the Jordanian king, they're very Western. Their military is not going to invade Israel. The Egyptians, their military is more of a for-profit industry these days. If you want to do a show about the Egyptian military, it's a fascinating military. They own like soda bottling plants, and they have their own.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. They're building a new governmental center, a new capital. That's, I think, about 40 miles away from Cairo, out in the middle of the desert. And their military headquarters is actually larger than the Pentagon. It's going to be larger than the Pentagon. So yeah, the Egyptian army is basically a for-profit industry. So you don't necessarily want to go to war; it'll hurt profit, right? What else do you have? Syria. Syria is a basket case, right? They can barely defend themselves. You have Lebanon. All right. Well, Lebanon. For the most part, the military in Lebanon is busy trying to keep the peace. They're not necessarily anti-Israeli. Hezbollah, they're kind of like their own military. They might be able to invade Israel, but they certainly wouldn't be able to hold any ground. They wouldn't be able to sustain as well. So what other countries do you have? Iraq, it'd be a tough time getting there. Saudi Arabia, same thing. So you could have that scenario of 7 nations invade Israel, but these days all those other 7 nations are occupied, and for the most part they don't have expeditionary armies. They're all what are called palace guard armies, like you alluded to before. How the function of the army is to keep the ruler in power.
Ryan, thank you very much. This is we're probably going to end up doing something else, because I feel like this conflict is going to get messier before it gets better. What do you think?
I hope not, but I love coming on the show, and I always appreciate you reaching out to me.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube is not the only place that you can check out The Jordan Harbinger Show. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description, where you will find access to our shows that don't appear on YouTube, like Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, even lawns, to find out if they're backed by science and logic, or if they're just complete nonsense. Spoiler, many of them are complete nonsense. Also, our Feedback Friday shows, where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, all the way down to the bottom of the barrel. And every episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful you can take away and apply in your own life, and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Life can be hard, yes, but we are here to help. And if you appreciate how we help, remember to like, comment, and subscribe.